what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Greetings to our loyal WFYL listeners around the world. Welcome back to your Philadelphia Friday, only on the Freedom Station. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in once again, because you still have the right to hear and the right to be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike G, and you're participating in Mike G in the Morning with The Law Matters. And you can listen to our program every Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. So let's be heard. I want to remind our listeners about the powerhouse lineup we've got here at the Freedom Station. We want you to kick off your mornings with Scott Adams, bringing you the Scott Adams Show. We've got Dan the Man Bongino, bringing you the Dan Bongino Show. We've got Dana Lash. We've got Michael Knowles. We've got Matt Walsh. Check out his new movie, Am I Racist?, in theaters. You're going to love it. And we've got Ben Shapiro bringing you the Ben Shapiro Show. So don't forget to tune in and show him some love. And with that, you know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. We've got a very special guest on our program here today. We've got Dr. Tamsin Rosenwasser. Dr. Tamsin Rosenwasser. Dr. Rosenwasser is dual board certified in internal medicine and dermatology. She's been a physician for several decades, and she is also the past president, the treasurer, and in charge of the PAC for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Dr. Rosenwasser, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a delight.
You know, Rosenwasser is not an easy one, sort of like Jeremita. That's why people call me Mike G, so I might just call you Doctor for the remainder of the episode. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
Doctor, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you became a physician in the first place?
Well, I was going to be a veterinarian to begin with because I am a hardcore dog lover, but my mother got sick with tuberculosis when I was in the 6th grade. She was diagnosed and she was in the hospital in DC General in Washington, D.C. for 9 months. She wasn't expected to live, but she did live. She came home, and nobody knows how she got tuberculosis. It was not uncommon in Washington, D.C. among the Black population. She had worked in a hospital during World War II. That'll never be known, but there was a government program to stamp out tuberculosis in Washington, D.C., and like most government programs, it went haywire. When I was in the 9th grade, we got a call from the 9th Precinct Police Station, and they said that there was a warrant for my mother's arrest. She was arrested and taken away. The same day, my father, who was a World War II veteran and probably really did have PTSD, disappeared. And we were left at home alone, 4 of us. We delivered 3 newspaper routes. I boarded dogs for people who went away on vacation for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we shoveled snow. We didn't tell anybody what happened. My mother, incarcerated in Glendale Hospital, managed to smuggle a letter by the newspaper man through a slot in the door to the Corporation Council of the District of Columbia. And she got a hearing before a Judge Edward A. Beard, habeas corpus. She was incarcerated but hadn't been charged with a crime. And at the hearing, it came out that 4 minor children were at home alone. And so Judge Beard let her go. She was already taking the medicine every day, but she didn't get it from the U.S. Public Health Service. She got it from an Army commissary. So they were wrong. She came home. She was taking the medicine. She was forced to go to a U.S. Public Health Service clinic. And there was a follow-up hearing. At the follow-up hearing, the District of Columbia hung more crepe, and she was taken in a filthy paddy wagon, this time to DC General Hospital because she's called Glendale a snake pit and a hellhole in court. The judge, John J. Malloy, told us that someday we would thank him. Hasn't happened yet, Judge. And from DC General, she wrote another letter and got another hearing before Judge William B. Jones, who said that the District of Columbia had not followed the law because there was no physical exam on the chart. And the headline that day said, TB patient-free district, quote, broke law, unquote. So when they break a law, it's in quotes, but when you don't break a law, you can wind up incarcerated. So that's why I became a physician, to protect my family, friends, and others when they got sick.
That is an incredible story. You say we, how many siblings were there?
One brother and two sisters.
And you were in 9th grade at the time?
I was in 9th grade at the time, yes.
And how old were the other siblings?
One was 3 years older than I am, and one was a year younger. Another one was 4 years younger.
So
I was the positive executive.
That's almost unfathomable. And your father disappears on the same day?
Yes.
And did anything ever come of that? Did anybody ever find out what happened?
He just left. I don't know where he went, but my mother died when I was in the 10th grade, toward the end of the 10th grade. My brother found her body. I do not know to this day who paid for her funeral, but my father showed up at her funeral. We were all surprised to see him because we hadn't seen him for a couple years by then. And he then disappeared off and on. But I got a scholarship to New College in Sarasota, Florida. So I figured out how to get there. I went there with my dog. I didn't drink beer or have sex or take drugs. I actually studied chemistry, physics, calculus, biology.
Wow.
And then I sent myself to medical school.
Talk about a story of the American dream and achievement. I mean, that's some incredible adversity that you had to face. What was the original warrant for? Because you said that she had been incarcerated without being charged with a crime.
It was something about, they thought she wasn't taking medicine. There was it was like the Communicable Disease Act or something like that. But the fact is, she was taking medicine. I saw her taking it every day.
And there was no trial regarding whether she had been taking the medicine?
No.
And just held
indefinitely. In fact, I've never gotten a transcript. I'd love to have transcripts of those 3 hearings.
Yeah, we got to work on that with you. I might know somebody who's admitted in D.C. who could help us out, because
that would
this
be
is
wonderful.
A fascinating story. Is there a movie about this or any book written about the story?
I am actually writing a book. I've been writing it for several years, and I keep getting derailed because I'm doing all the political work, but I'm calling it lidocaine drip. Lidocaine is something that you give people when they're having what's called tachycardia. And if you've got tachycardia, you can go from ventricular tachycardia to ventricular fibrillation, and then you're dead, unless someone saves your life.
Now, when you're in the 9th grade and mom's gone, dad's gone, and you're running this household as children, what's going through your mind? How did that make you feel?
We just did it. We didn't know what else to do. We just kept on going. I remember one night we were sitting around in the dark trying to figure out how to pay the bills with what money we had, and there was a terrible noise out on the front porch, and we froze, but the noise stopped. So we got up and crept out, and someone had put a cardboard box full of canned goods on the front porch. But we didn't tell anybody. We had this feeling that we had to keep everything secret. We were sort of like, the outcasts.
And
I did have a good friend, the middle daughter of the chief congressional correspondent for Newsweek, and she and I still kind of hung out during those times.
When Dad shows up at the funeral and he's been gone during this entire time that you children were fending for yourselves, what was that like? What did that feel like to see him show up?
It was bizarre. It's kind of like he wasn't at my mother's wake. There was a wake. And again, like I say, I don't know who paid for this. I didn't know back then that you had to pay for funerals. And then at the funeral itself, we were just totally surprised. I mean, I'm like, what now? Where'd you come from?
Wow, that takes some kind of audacity to do that, and almost seems like perhaps he was struggling with some kind of significant mental illness. No.
I would say yes. He was the youngest of a large family. Both of them were. And I mean, he had successful brothers, but I mean, I'm also the niece of 7 World War II veterans. And his brothers, most of them were in World War II. And my mother's brothers were also. So I don't know what it is. They grew up in Chicago, and neither my mother nor my father had good fathers. The father is critically important.
And we're seeing that more and more today. And that's just a horrible thing to do, to leave children like that. But it makes you think, for someone to show back up and sort of not recognize the magnitude of what had happened, that maybe something wasn't right mentally. That's
right.
I'm not a physician or anything, but
it seemed to be a blank in his mind.
After Mom passes away, you said it's not like he comes back around and says, okay, I'm going to take care of you kids now. He's still in and out. And so who are you staying with? Who's in charge?
We kept on delivering the newspapers. I kept on taking care of people's dogs when they went away. Actually, I'm surprised now. People gave me the keys to their homes starting when I was about 8 or 9 years old, so I could go in and take care of their dogs when their dogs weren't actually staying with us. And I kept right on doing that. Then I worked for Dart Drug on G Street in Washington, D.C., because I was born in and I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I saved my money. And of course, when I got my first tax vulnerable paycheck, I looked at it and I thought, what the hell happened? I mean, I had no idea about FICA. I mean, I was, I've been in the USA at the worst possible time. If you were 65 in 1935, you got other people's money and you'd never given a cent. If you were 65 in 1965, you got other people's money and you'd never put in a cent. I had to pay Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes from the very beginning. And not only that, but, at one time there was no tax on Social Security either. So now Social Security has an 85% tax rate on it.
Wow.
85% of it is taxable. So I call what we're in now coup d'etat number 4. Number 1 was Woodrow Wilson. I just heard Vivek Ramaswamy talking about the Federal Reserve. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the Federal Reserve, that's Woodrow Wilson, coup d'etat number 1. It's unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution, the 5th clause, says that one of the enumerated powers of Congress is, quote, to coin money and set the value thereof. The Federal Reserve is private bankers, and they just print green paper, which is considered money. It's nothing but green paper. And of course, Woodrow Wilson was responsible for getting us into World War I. We had no reason to be in World War I. First time our country got involved in other nations' business that we had nothing to do with. He also was responsible for the income tax and resegregating the U.S. civil service. And then, of course, FDR, that was Social Security. Reportedly, he tasked Frances Perkins, the Secretary of Labor, to come up with the Social Security stuff. And they thought, oh, it's probably unconstitutional. So she expressed that worry to, I think it was Harlan Fiske Stone at a party, and he is said to have whispered to her, the tax clause, my dear, the tax clause, something like that. Mm. And actually, in the Constitution, it says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States, not of Pakistan, not of Iran, not of all the rest of these nations, but of the United States of America. And when we weaken ourselves, we're not going to be able to help anyone in any way. So FDR is also responsible for enslaving between 60 and 70 million people in Central and Eastern Europe after World War II. He collaborated with Joe Stalin on that. And he's also responsible for the strength of the USSR. I mean, Hitler and Stalin had a non-aggression pact, and when Hitler broke that by attacking Russia, FDR should have said, well, good luck, Joe, but, tough luck. Should have let Hitler chase him to Vladivostok. And FDR is responsible for the gigantic administrative state also. And Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't realize that, education is not a proper function of government. Medical care, not a proper function of government. So that's all unconstitutional. And then LBJ continued it with Medicare and Medicaid. Now we got a lot of people coming to see doctors, it's my toenails. Well, what's the matter? Can you walk? Yeah. Can you put your shoes on? Yes. Well, how long have you had the problem? Quote, ever since I was in the South Pacific in World War II. Well, so what's the problem? Quote, oh, they're so ugly. And the guy's wife has seen a TV ad for some medicine that can damage your liver, but might make your toenails prettier if you take it for several months. So you want to be in your coffin with pretty toenails or what? And I wouldn't prescribe it. And now we got Obama, Joe Obama. Obama on November 20, 2020 actually is we have a video of him saying that, sure, if he could be in his basement and someone could have a bud in their ear and he could just talk to him and tell him what to do, he'd be fine with a third term.
Ultimately, you raise some good points about the overreach of government and the types of things that happen. And once they're there, it's very difficult to start to pare them back. And far too often, people are focused on the ideas that these politicians put out as to whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea. It is very, very infrequently that we're asking, does the government have the authority to do this? Or is this the domain of the government, particularly the federal government? And I think once we start asking that question, we'll be in much better shape.
I agree totally.
So, Doctor, I want to go back to your story. You were talking about how you put yourself through medical school. Is your mother's situation part of what steered you towards the medical profession?
Yes. I wanted to be sure that I had the power to protect people. Myself, my family, my friends, and strangers. I was an emergency room physician in St. Louis for a number of years, but it was a city hospital and it went broke and closed. Of course, I was also at Barnes Hospital. I was in the emergency room, the respiratory, in medical, neurologic intensive care units, the surgical intensive care units, doing consultations and, the whole 9 yards. And doctors don't, we don't spend weeks or months making a decision. Sometimes you've got to make a decision in seconds,
sure,
like whether to put a chest tube in somebody or a central line or to intubate them, whatever. It has to be done immediately. And we also don't come up with, we don't sit down, we'll form a committee to decide what to do with this guy that's been shot in the chest. No. Sometimes we brought him in from the front door of the emergency room, and then you just start doing it. If he needs to be coded, someone's compressions, another person's putting a line in, someone's intubating him. You just do what needs to be done.
I need you to settle a debate for us. As a firearms attorney, you hear a lot of people in the gun community talking about which caliber is superior. When you were a physician in the emergency department dealing with gunshot victims, were you more concerned about the location versus the type of caliber? Did you ever have a patient being wheeled in and ask, well, was it a 9mm or was it a 380? Was that ever part of the equation?
Never. I would love to have known, though. I would love to have known what kind of gun shot a guy through the heart.
Mm.
And there was a small hole in the heart coming and going. I've never figured out how it didn't destroy his entire heart.
Mm.
I had to read about him in the newspaper. I had to read about a lot of my patients in the newspaper. It sounded like he got shot through the open passenger window of a car during a drug deal. So we cracked his chest. We put a Foley catheter in one hole, and we sewed up the other hole. And the surgeons weren't in the operating room, so they came down and got him and saved his life.
But it's fair to say that placement is the most important part when you're dealing with that.
No, the most important part is just addressing what's happened to the person.
Oh,
not what kind of gun.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I meant placement as far as was he hitting the chest? Was he hitting any vitals or anything
right,
like that? Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's being hit in the chest is better than being hit in the gut unless you're hitting the heart.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
What's the reason for that?
Because the guts, you got more stuff down there, and also it's not as clean. You got the bowels, you got the stomach acid, you got the spleen that's going to really bleed badly. So it's always better to be shot in the chest than in the gut. Of course, you got big blood vessels down there too. Steve Scalise, he did very well, but part of that was because Brad Renstrup was there, and he's a physician, so he could stop the bleeding.
And had attention immediately as a result.
Right.
For those of us just tuning in, you're listening to Mike G in the Morning with The Law Matters, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. Now, Doctor, I want to talk about something. It seems that the medical profession these days has become politicized to a degree. I know particularly from the Second Amendment perspective, you'll see physicians' organizations coming out and taking anti-Second Amendment positions in many different facets. Is that something that you've noticed?
I've definitely noticed it. Medical care has gone downhill in this country. Of course, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, we're pretty conservative. Medical schools have been infiltrated with the same Marxist, leftist people that the rest of society has been infiltrated by. All this stuff about, I call it DIE, because you can't have equity without diversity and inclusion first, right? So I call it DIE, CRT. I mean, most of the people in my emergency room were African American descent. And most of the people that worked there with me were also African American descent. The LPNs, the RNs, the social workers, the X-ray technicians, they were African American. They had not been destroyed by the U.S. government. The Black family was destroyed by Lyndon Johnson. And when I was growing up in Washington, D.C., there were I saw Black people from the moment I opened my eyes, and they went to school, they went to work, they went to church.
And is it your position that the government has destroyed those values, or has at least played a role in destroying those values?
Yes. I mean, so many of the people in my emergency room, they were not elderly people. They were not the usual sick people. They were young people who had shot, stabbed, raped each other, assaulted people with baseball bats and bleach. It was a lot of assault. It was smoking, booze, drugs, violence, and bad sex decisions that were the great majority of the problems that I dealt with in the emergency room.
Have you ever been criticized as being racist for saying any of these things?
Not to my knowledge, but the fact is that I guess maybe because of the way I grew up, where I made my own decisions from a very young age, and I had nothing to lose by telling the truth. There are people who were in my high school class who, are now fretting and fuming about racism and fragility and all the rest of the stuff. Anybody born in the USA is one of the luckiest people ever to walk the face of the earth, no matter what color they are. Of course, growing up in Washington, D.C., I had a taste for the exotic. So I loved to see people, and there were people in my, in my immediate neighborhood from, let's see, Cuba, Argentina, Haiti, France, Japan, Korea, China, Estonia, Poland, um, the Congo. I might be leaving something out, but
People from everywhere, it sounds like.
everywhere. And I listened to them. Some of them had been in Poland, for example, in World War II. They told me about it.
I heard you talk in a different interview at some point about how, as a physician, you look at everybody the same because anatomically everybody's the same regardless of your skin tone. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
That is correct. It's definitely correct. There was never a time when I looked at someone and said, "Hey, this person's not as important as the next person."
Or even would that have anything to do with their treatment? You say, oh, well, this person's an Italian guy versus this person's black guy. I've got to treat them. It's going to affect the way that I treat them because there's some kind of anatomical difference. Or is
No,
everybody the same thing under the skin?
same thing, same thing. Actually, when you cut somebody open, it's not like those encyclopedias where you put one page on the other and it all looks really neat and everything. You've got all the connective tissue in there, and people do have some differences inside, but it has nothing to do with race.
Hmm.
It just has to do with individuality. And there's no way that you can be a good physician and treat people as a collective. You must treat people as individuals because that's what they are.
So do you think that society sort of ramps up the racial division by classifying people like that?
Yes,
You know,
definitely.
when you say that the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons is a more conservative organization, what do you mean by that? What values do you stand for?
Well, first of all, we were formed as a breakoff from the American Medical Association in 1943 because we did not believe that the government should be involved in medical care.
Mm.
And that was when it first started being talked of by Truman. It was supposed to, FDR wanted it, but it was too big a lift. And it didn't happen with Truman, but then, of course, LBJ later on. But that was almost 2 decades later. We are for the physician-patient relationship. The patient is paramount. We're here to take care of the patient, whatever the problem is, and whoever the patient is. We also do not believe in murdering babies.
Mm.
Okay, everyone has reproductive freedom. They can reproduce if they want to, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. But once they have, they should not be murdering the person that they have created. So we're conservative that way. We do not believe in the Marxist nonsense that's going on. And there's no such thing as transgender. You're either a male or a female. That's the way it is. That's the way it's been for millennia and millennia, and there's no way to change it. All you're doing is surgical mutilation, which is criminal. And the physicians who are doing that, really, they should be prosecuted.
Particularly for those who are doing it to people who are very young ages.
Absolutely.
Have you ever
It's
seen
the fashion now.
Have you ever seen any cases where somebody had that done and then they severely regretted it?
There was one case at Barnes Hospital back in the day where somebody was actually trying to do this. It wasn't a common thing back then, and it was a lot of people didn't like the idea that it had been done, a surgical procedure, and then the patient tried to commit suicide.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was terrible.
I think a lot of
You
these
know.
people are hurting at the end of the day, and that's
Right.
why they go down this road.
We haven't really considered the effect that TV, movies, smartphones have on children. They don't know the difference between fantasy and reality. And then they have all this stuff where uh, they're 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 part of a group, and the group has this peer pressure, and it becomes, you know, they get attention for wanting to be something that they're not or whatever, and it's a disaster.
Now, we talked about physicians' organizations taking positions on gun rights and the Second Amendment. How does your organization feel about the Second Amendment? Does any questioning regarding your status as a gun owner belong in the physician-patient relationship?
No, no, and we don't think so. Um, I mean, how is it, in Switzerland, everyone has a gun, but they don't kill each other. Now, if you show babies and young children um, videos, movies, TV shows where people are killing each other, what do you expect to happen?
Mm.
It's not the gun that kills somebody; it's the person with the gun. It's just the same way as car crashes. Everyone has to have a sense of responsibility.
So,
The Second Amendment is there for a very good reason. It's our protection against the government.
and so it's your position that physicians shouldn't be just asking this blanket question to every patient who comes in. Do you own guns? How many guns are in the home? Things of that nature.
No,
Is it none of their
no,
business?
none of their business. No.
Hmm. Could it have any impact on their medical treatment whatsoever? I mean, I'm not sure how exactly that
Yeah, I
comes
don't
into
know
play.
whether it does anywhere else. It never did with
Yeah.
me. I did ask about smoking and booze because those are directly, involved in many diseases. I mean,
Hmm.
cirrhosis of the liver, esophageal carcinoma, bladder carcinoma, lung cancer, COPD, and all the rest of it. So, you know, and I've had several really good friends die from lung cancer. So it's all I can do not to tell even strangers that it would be better for them to set fire to their money directly rather than paying someone for cigarettes.
What
You
about
know,
cigars? Can we get a pass for cigars? I'm in trouble. So, doctor, one thing I think that the left wants to paint the right as people who uh, are not intellectuals and they're of low intelligence, they're uneducated. Obviously, you're a walking example, living, breathing example of how that's not the case. I can't imagine, first of all, how was it a challenge to accomplish what you did educationally being a woman?
uh, I don't think so. I mean, I never thought anything about being a woman. I mean, when I was in college, there were some, there were some women that tried to get me to come with whatever the woman movement was back then, and I just wasn't interested.
Mm.
For one thing, um, I I grew up. I mean, even in medical school, there was a Tamsin lookalike day, and it said, "Come to class in the weirdest clothes you own." Well, I was buying my clothes at the New Hope thrift shop.
Oh.
So we had my some of my classmates said, "Oh no, you shouldn't be, insulting her," and the others said, "Well, we don't think." So they came to me, and I said, "Oh, I'm coming as myself." So um, I won, but there was a guy that came with a blouse, a skirt, and stockings on. I think it was orange, green, and purple. So we had a good time. I mean, people, let's get over it. Have a sense of humor.
Wow. Were there many other women in your class in
There
medical school?
were, let's see, I'm not sure exactly how many. Uh, just possibly 15%. I don't know.
Oh,
I
good.
was, I was, I mean, I was really studying. I, I was at the top of the class. I helped some of my classmates, kind of tutored them, and I mean, one time a guy asked, he was an embryologist, and he asked a rhetorical question. Okay, the cerebrospinal fluid is made in the ventricles, but how does it get from the ventricles to the spinal cord? So I said, well, it gets there through the foramina of Luschka and Magendie. And, he was, flabbergasted. But I had just read ahead, that's all.
Yeah, that's all. Piece of cake.
Well,
Anybody who read ahead would know that. It's obvious.
well, I ascribe my ability to keep on going to dogs, and the fact that I learned to read early. So the dogs were my companions, and I used to take an Irish setter. She wasn't mine. She belonged to Sam and Miriam Kramer, and they told me I could take her for a walk anytime I wanted to. I took her home once when she was running loose. So I would take Penny to something that was called the Washington Home for Incurables. Nobody ever said that dog needs to be on a leash or anything. She chased rabbits and squirrels. Then we'd sit down on benches around a little fountain, and I just listened to the incurables tell me their stories.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and I learned that people who look weird and who really can barely even get their hand to pet a dog are nevertheless have the same emotions and thoughts that everyone else has.
Is that term incurable still used today? I don't know that I've ever heard that.
No, they've changed it to the Washington Home.
Just the home. They didn't, no
The
replacement for
Washington Home.
incurables. And
No,
what would the
no.
definition be of incurable? Is it just as it sounds?
Well, it was people with cerebral palsy, something called Vonrecklinghausens disease, where people have tumors hanging all over them, but they're benign. Different forms of crippling disease, neurologic problems, but it wasn't like they were really dying. They were just chronically disabled.
Mm.
And it was a very humane place. The people had a beautiful garden, and they had screened in porches. So it was good. Growing up in Washington taught me a lot. I roamed all over the city. I read the words of our founders chiseled in stone. I talked to people from all over the world, and I got to know a whole bunch of dogs. And I met some good people. I wasn't able to confide in them back then. I mean, I'm more open about stuff. It doesn't really matter anymore. Um, who cares if I'm weird? Back then, it was kind of like, you had to hide things more.
When they changed the name to the Washington Home, that sort of sounds like when the Washington Redskins changed to the Washington football team for that brief period
Oh,
over there.
yeah, I'm
Just
not
drop
sure what the
everything else.
timing was.
So we've got an important election coming up. I think that's fair to say. And I know that one of the things you're passionate about is election integrity. Am I right about that?
Right, absolutely. And you're in Pennsylvania, where there was massive fraud in 2020. The Republican legislature passed Act 77,
Right.
which is in direct violation of Article 14 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and that's what allowed for the mail-out ballots. They traded with the Democrats for getting rid of single lever voting,
Right.
but
Silly
they
trade, right?
counted. Pardon?
Very silly trade, right?
Very silly trade, and so we're counting ballots now, not votes.
Mm.
Um, I, you know, I mean, I've seen some of the stuff of the mail truck loaded with ballots, um, and Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, I'm in charge of the PAC for AAPS. If I accepted a check for $5,000.01, it would be the end of the world. But Mark Zuckerberg, a private citizen, is allowed to spend $416 million for his Center for Tech and Civic Life, putting ballot drop boxes wherever he wants to put them.
Well, Act 77 was an interesting one because we had a lot of legal debates about this, and if you looked at the precedent as to how they had ruled on Article 14 in the past, I thought there was no way that that could be reconciled with the law as it was written. Ultimately, the Republicans had egg on their face because the same people who voted for this law ended up showing up at court and saying, oh, by the way, the law we passed is unconstitutional, please strike it down. And that just looks ridiculous from a practical perspective. But a colleague of mine and I were having a friendly debate on this program where I was saying there was no way that the Supreme Court would be able to reconcile Act 77 with the existing case law. He disagreed and thought that the Supreme Court would find it to be constitutional. It turns out we were both wrong, because while they did find it constitutional, they were unable to reconcile it with the existing case law and basically said, we're overruling that existing case law and we're coming up with our own interpretation right now, and that's how we ended up where we are. But there are some really basic fundamental things that I think a lot of people can get on the same page, whether they're typically on the left or the right, and really highlights and puts a magnifying glass on who the extremists are. Some basic things like voter ID. They've been claiming that voter ID is something that's racist and it's suppressing the votes of minorities. Meanwhile, I had an African American on my program who was running for office. I asked him about that, and he said it's racist to claim that ID laws are racist, as if African Americans can't get a hold of an ID or they wouldn't be able to vote if that were the case. What's people's gripe with voter identification?
They should have voter identification. I mean, if we don't have voter ID and we go on like this, we might as well just say, oh, we're dissolving the United States of America. This is a nation, our nation. We all came here, we built it. People respected the law better in the past, although there has been fraud for a long time. I mean, the Marx Brothers talked about fraud in New York, but nothing like on the level now. There should be voter ID, just like there's ID for every other little thing.
Right. We have to show ID to buy cigarettes and alcohol. You have to show ID, obviously, to purchase firearms. There's a million things. You could get on an airplane, right? Everything else we need an identification.
There's nothing racist about it.
Yeah.
It is racist to say that it's racist. Oh, the African Americans are too dumb to get an ID card. Baloney.
I would be embarrassed to even suggest that. Could you imagine walking over to a real live human being and saying, oh, you can't get an ID, right? You'd probably looking to slap you if you said something like that to their face, right?
Sure.
And another thing, well, first of all, we see in California, they just passed this law that they're not even permitted to ask for identification, right?
Right. You can vote in California with no ID at all. They don't ask for any ID. You just walk in and vote. You can be from Tajikistan or Iran or anywhere, and just walk in and vote.
And people are concerned that non-citizens will be voting in upcoming elections, right?
Right. Well, people should get out and be, it's a little bit late to be a poll worker. You can be a poll watcher. I'm a poll greeter for the most part because I go home briefly to take care of my Newfoundland dog, but I've been out there. People have to not just talk about it, but actually act.
Doesn't it seem that something like only citizens should be able to vote and we should be ensuring that only citizens can vote would be something that we can unanimously agree upon? Why is there this pushback?
It's because the Democrats have been infiltrated by communists. They want chaos. They want things to fall apart so that they can pick up all the pieces and, I guess, make all the rest of us enslaved.
Another thing that I think has sort of diminished the trust that the people have in the process is the fact that we're getting these results so far after Election Day. So when you're waiting and waiting and waiting for these results, you don't have a count that night right, the same day,
Right.
then it sort of creates an appearance of impropriety. Like, what kind of funny business is going on if it's taking this long? Do you think it would be wise
Exactly.
to ensure that we get back to everything counted the same day to get rid of that distrust that people have in the system right now?
Yes, yes. It should be counted in the precincts before ever being transferred to a central location. If France can do it, we can do it. For heaven's sake, we've done it before. The electronic voting machines are proprietary, so they're owned by private entities. We can't audit them, uh, and they're very susceptible to fraud. There are if you've got a smartphone, and most people do, you can go to the app store and get a wireless monitoring app, and you can figure out everything that's connected to the internet within a certain radius of your phone. And I think you can delete the cell phones, and you can get the IP addresses and figure out whether the voting machines are connected to the internet. We can't go on this way. We've got to stand up and absolutely say no. We should have said, this is something new. We've got to take care of it. That didn't happen. Now, here's what I think about President Trump. He's led a sheltered life. He had good parents, had a good family, had money, and his father got him into his business. Now, he has worked hard, and he actually saw plumbers, welders, electricians, and he has respect for working people who do real work. But I don't think he ever really came face to face with true evil and recognized it for what it was. He has now, at least to a better extent. Now, I've come face to face with evil. And so I will never trust the government. But I would like for there to be more reason for us to be less distrustful than we are now.
And when this was all happening and people had questions, a lot of the mainstream media, and of course people on the left, painted anybody who had questions as a terrible person and some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist. And they really attacked anybody who raised any of these questions. Now, being an attorney, I don't like to make claims unless I've got all of the proof laid out and I can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But what I can say is there's nothing unreasonable about somebody having some questions about a guy who couldn't fill up a high school gymnasium getting more votes than any candidate in the history of presidential elections, and then just 3.5 years later having to drop out of the race because there's no statistical chance that he can win this thing. I don't think that it's unreasonable for people to be scratching their heads over this. Is that fair?
It's definitely fair. I mean, I had a sign on my trash can in Florida, and the sign was big because the trash can's large, and it said, "My trash collectors do more work before lunch than Joe Biden has done in half a century. Only their work is useful." Joe Biden has never produced anything, and neither has Kamala. She's never produced anything worthwhile. So, and yeah, he had people sitting, in white circles. Nobody cared about Joe Biden. He's a total nobody. In fact, I pray for him because he's, what can I say?
Yeah, it certainly seems like he's not doing well, and the people in the country are left with questions as to what's actually going on in the Oval Office and who's running this country right now. It's a little concerning. Another thing,
I think it's Obama.
Oh, you do?
Approximately.
Yeah.
Approximately.
Yeah, pulling the strings, making decisions.
But look at the way our country's being attacked. Religion's being attacked. John Kerry just said that the First Amendment is a block.
Right.
The First Amendment's being attacked. We've got child sacrifice. The Electoral College is being attacked. the Supreme Court, oh, they got to remake that, in spite of the fact that a guy like FDR appointed 8 Supreme Court justices, one of whom was a Ku Klux Klansman,
Mm.
and they came up with opinions like Korematsu, where they said that Americans could be dispossessed of their property and put in camps if they were of Japanese descent. Buck versus Bell, where one of the I think which one it was, I could, his name would come to me, says that 2 generations of imbeciles are enough. Well,
Right.
what
Yeah.
kind of imbecile is he?
That was the
To say that.
that was the case where they were making the people infertile, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Sterilizing
So,
people
yeah.
who were thought to be mentally incompetent,
Forced
retarded.
sterilization. Yeah.
Right. And then Wicker versus Filburn, you grow 11 acres more wheat than the federal government thinks you should. Oh no, you can't do that.
See, that has started the most massive federal government overreach. I think that was the thread in the carpet that started it all, because once they were allowed
Right.
to use the Commerce Clause based on effects, hypothetical effects on commerce, right? Somebody's growing their own wheat for personal, private consumption, not selling it. But they're saying
Right.
that could impact commerce among the states. Well, at that point, you're playing like 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. Anything could have an impact on commerce. And that's
Right.
what the federal government's used in order to enact these laws and getting into things where they really have no authority to regulate them. But we could talk for hours about that. Another thing that people are asking a lot of questions about has to do with the mail-in voting, as far as people on the conservative side are typically very hesitant to do so. I did a poll on this program asking, would anybody consider voting by mail? Not even would you vote by mail, are you planning to vote by mail? Would you consider voting by mail? And I believe the poll was, if it wasn't 100% no, it was very close to 100% no. What do you think about mail-in voting? People who do support your cause, do you think that it's a good idea?
As soon as you put a ballot in a mailbox, you've broken the chain of custody.
Mm.
You've put your ballot in the hands of the U.S. Postal Service. And, there's very good, people working there. But frankly, I mean, do you think they know what kind of person you are from the kind of mail you get?
Mm.
Yes, they do. I'm sure that my mail person knows what side of the fence I'm on. So, why wouldn't they just throw your ballot away if you put it in your mailbox? Or if you just mail it, who knows? I mean, ballots were found in a ditch side of the road that had been mailed.
It could even be something that's not nefarious. I remember I had to send something that's 1 county over. I could have driven there in 45 minutes to deliver it. I sent it priority with a tracking number and everything, and it took a month to get there. Sometimes these things happen, and it might not get
That's
there as
true,
intended. I had
Yes.
a law enforcement office, deal with a lot of law enforcement officers in my profession, and I had all over Pennsylvania. And I had one tell me that the postal system's compromised, sort of getting into the types of cases that he had been dealing with involving the Postal Service and people's checks and things like that getting stolen. So there might be
Right.
concerns, even if it's not nefarious. What about, do you think that we're going to have audits in the aftermath of this coming election?
We better. People need to insist on audits and not just going back and recounting things by the machine, but hand counting the paper.
Mm.
Yes, because just doing the same thing over again, no, that's not good enough.
Do you think that it's a good idea, if early voting is possible in person, to go ahead and do that?
I think it's better to have maybe 1 day early or have 2 days of voting.
Mm.
Have voting on, maybe a day off. That would be okay. That would be fine. Have the voting day be a national holiday. But this early voting stuff, not a good idea. We're in the middle of a communist revolution in this country. And if we don't stand up and fight back now, it will be too late.
That's interesting. So you're against going there in person early, because people in Pennsylvania, the process they would use in order to do something like that is you basically show up and request an on-demand mail-in ballot. You fill it out, you hand it over. I guess you would be concerned about where does it go once you hand it over?
I'm not crazy about early. If it's maybe 2 days early, that would be okay, maybe. But 3 weeks? No. Too much can go wrong.
You have some
And
interesting ideas.
also, another thing, people in the primary election that just happened. Oh, thank you for voting. Well, I say if someone doesn't know what they're doing, no, don't vote. No, I wouldn't thank you for voting. I wouldn't thank you for just, being ignorant. You need to know what you're doing. It was George Washington who said that, that that so much was entrusted to the hands of the American people. So if someone doesn't know what they're doing, they shouldn't vote, and we shouldn't make it easy for a bunch of lazy bums to vote. If you don't care enough to register and you don't care enough to get there on election day, then forget it. We want people who are responsible.
A concern that somebody raised to me, which I thought was interesting, is that she knew a Republican who did not vote early and ended up getting called out of town on work and ended up not voting that day. And it's a fair point that sometimes things happen. You hear President Trump saying vote early, vote often, I think is something that he said as a joke.
Right.
But if you do vote early, that would sort of eliminate that possibility. Isn't that a fair point?
Yes, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. That's why I'd say, couple of days, or, if something really happens that somebody really needs to vote absentee. Now in Florida, they've got to request an absentee ballot, or they had to. Things,
But Florida was done the night of during the last election, right? We knew that result fairly quickly. And
yeah.
With that many people, if they can do it, why can't everybody else? I think that's the question that a lot of people had.
Everybody else could do it, right?
So we've got a lot of changes that we would need made. It's not going to happen for this election, but for now, everybody needs to get out there and vote. Is that right?
Right. People need to get out there. They need to know what they're doing. They need to be responsible.
Doctor, you've got a fascinating story. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Is there any last words you want to leave with our listeners with this upcoming election?
Do the work. Put your faith in Jesus Christ. There's more evidence for the life of Jesus Christ than for the Peloponnesian Wars that are taught in history classes.
Well, I said that I kind of made it sound like we were wrapping up, but now that you bring that up, let's talk about that, if you don't mind, if you've still got time.
No.
Okay.
Sure.
So this is another thing. I spoke earlier about how a lot of times people criticize people on the right of being low IQ, not intellectual, things of that nature. And Christians get the same criticisms. Why do you think that's so? That Christians get criticized as not being critical thinkers or of high intelligence, things along those lines?
I would really love to have a large scientific study of people who used to be ideologically possessed and have broken loose, and those who are ideologically possessed and don't seem to have any curiosity and will never break loose. What is the difference between those two people, between those two groups of people? I mean, somebody once said to me that she could not believe that I don't believe in evolution. Well, I've considered evolution, but Darwin had no clue about mitochondria, DNA, any of that stuff. He wrote a book, The Origin of Species, not The Origin of Life. You have to say, where did this come from? Where did that come from? And you go back and nobody can say. I mean, the best explanation for the Big Bang is Genesis. So I don't see how something as complicated as a human being or a bird or anything else could have come from random mutations. for one thing, most mutations are harmful. And for another, the the final common pathway is just too complicated. So uh so they may think we're stupid, but I think it's because they've been ideologically possessed and they can't think clearly. All they can do is go along the rail that their mind runs on, along with other people whose minds are running on the same rails.
What questions would you have as to whether God exists if you were not a Christian, if you hadn't found your faith? Are there any questions that stand out to you intellectually that maybe you have a hard time coming to terms with?
I suppose it seems somewhat unlikely that a dead man would rise in 3 days. But if you look at the actual history, look at the apostles. They were a bunch of chicken-hearted cowards, you know. They were hiding. And all of a sudden, they've got they've got courage. They're out there doing it. They're not afraid anymore. And I think it's because they saw Jesus Christ alive.
Another thing is a lot of them were ultimately killed for their faith. And you would think
Yes.
that out of all of them, eventually one of them, while they're really about to be killed, right? There's a knife
Yeah.
to their throat, so to speak. There's the gun to their head. I know they didn't have firearms like that back then. But whatever it may have been, when they were knocking on death's door like that, you would think that just one of them would say, all right, you got us. We made it all up. It didn't really
Right,
happen.
right,
And that just
right.
simply didn't happen. And
No, it did not.
a lot of people try to look at this from a scientific perspective, and really that's the wrong way to look at it, because in order to look at it from a scientific perspective, it's got to be repeatable. We can't do that. I think a historical perspective is more accurate,
Right.
and if you were putting on a case, I think that would be a favorable point.
Right. I think so too.
Was there any one thing that how long have you been a believer? Let me ask you that.
Well, I was born into a Catholic family.
Hmm.
You know, when I got to New College, I didn't have any transportation, so I had no way to get to a church. And it never occurred to me to say, hey, we've got, you know, a van. Can we get some people to church? So, you know, I wasn't going to church for a while. And I think when my Springer Spaniel died one night, and, you know, there was something about that really got me back.
Is there anything that stands out to you that you know in your heart that it's undeniable? Is there any one thing that brings you there? Like if somebody was standing with you, they were a non-believer, they said, tell me one thing. Or have we already talked about that? That it's just too complicated to end up with human beings without a God. And, you know, what you said about the apostles, being bold and courageous, and of course not ever confessing that it was made up when they were knocking on death's door. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, there's the whole history of the Jewish people. And I mean, you know, if you read the Bible, Israel was reconstituted in one day.
Mm.
The Jewish people, you know, it says over and over in the Bible, they will be brought back to Israel from all the lands in which they've been scattered. And that happened.
So
But
prophecies
if you
being
look at the
fulfilled.
world, right. And if you look at the world, I mean, how the world works, it's just not something that happened by chance.
What about, is there anything in the Bible particularly that troubles you? For example, the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Noah. Any of those things sort of raise questions for you?
I suppose that some people might say that some of it's not totally literal. But what's happened in history seems to me to prove that the Bible is true and real. And the United States of America is one of those things. You know, they say that our founders were deists. In other words, they thought it was a God. He didn't really have anything to do with us. No, George Washington had faith in God, He prayed to God. And the things that happened were beyond what it would have been possible to do. I mean, a, a ragtag bunch of American colonists defeated the most powerful empire on earth.
Yeah.
And went from being a third world backwater to the leader in the world in agriculture, medicine, science, commerce, transportation, manufacturing in less than 200 years.
What are the odds, right?
And we were founded on a definite philosophy. And it's basically a philosophy that is based in religion.
Well, and ultimately, you know, there are a lot of things that we could talk about, but it sounds like you're pretty strong in your faith, and it's good to hear that well-educated people like yourself aren't afraid to stand up for that and have these conversations with people. So we appreciate that. Last day for registration in Pennsylvania is October 21st. So this is right around the corner. People got to get out there and register to vote if they believe in their values and they want their voice to be heard, don't they?
Yes, and don't forget, October the 19th is it's the anniversary of the Battle of Yorktown, where George Washington won the Revolutionary War, basically, in 1781, although the treaty wasn't signed until 1783. Well, it formally ended in 1783.
So people got to remember about October 19th.
That's right.
Yeah, that's important. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. We appreciate you.
You're very welcome. It's been a delight.
Same here. We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you. Thanks for watching and being a part of the Mike G in the Morning family. You're not alone. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out one of the other videos suggested